to some discussion before Q&A. And it strikes me at least that on the one hand, Josh is saying many of the states we associate with socialism aren't actually socialist, and on the other hand, you're really making the case that capitalism as you would like to see it isn't currently in existence. But if you each have to choose one state, one society that comes as closer than others to your ideal destination, what would it be?
Today or in history?
Right now.
Right now.
This is the advantage of being a chair.
I mean, I think that it's a really difficult question to answer because we live in what I would call a mixed economy world, a world in which there are elements of capitalism. There's some private property, but that private property is heavily controlled by the authorities. And maybe 20 years ago, I would have said Hong Kong, but given China's takeover of Hong Kong, political takeover of Hong Kong, I hesitate because what a horrible place China is turning Hong Kong into by bringing in its collectivization, its collective, attitudes, and the inability to speak freely. A lot of places that are relatively speaking, economically free are socially unfree, like Singapore. So I hesitate to even mention Singapore because I don't support the socialism there. So it's hard. So if I had to pick, right? So I've got in my head the economic freedom index, right? So number one and number two, we've crossed out for China and social freedom. I think number three is New Zealand, which I happen to love because it's the most beautiful place on the planet. And I think number three, number four, number five are New Zealand, Switzerland, and Ireland. And number six is the United States. So I would say New Zealand, Switzerland, Ireland would be my top three that I would choose, where you get a good balance of both social freedoms and quite a bit of economic freedom at the same time.
Okay,
and now that Ireland has passed a law allowing for abortion, I'm good with that too.
Okay, three for the price of one. Josh, what about you?
Well, look, as I already mentioned, first of all, capitalism is itself a global system. So identifying specific countries and saying that is a vision of the society we want to see is I don't think it works as a method. I'm going to try and answer the question, don't I? And that applies all the more for socialism. The whole basis of, at least my vision of socialism, most of the socialists I've spoken to, is that socialism is international or it's nothing. That it requires the international cooperation of workers and nations everywhere. And otherwise, it is simply not going to work. So picking a socialist nation, which often, the kind of socialist revolutions that are taking place in formerly colonially subjugated countries, which have tried to liberate themselves. In order to do that, have then expropriated the factories from often foreign-owned companies, or the mines and so on, and then have had to try and find their own way. Often those regimes have degenerated. Some of them have degenerated extremely quickly, and so would hardly conform to an ideal picture of society, perhaps in anyone's mind. Although one thing they have done, often, they've actually been able to develop the economy, develop literacy and things like that. Often at quite a big cost though. But in terms of talking about specific countries, one which currently still exists, which is trying to move in a socialist direction. I don't think it's there yet. I don't think socialism has ever been built anywhere, incidentally. And many of the people who tried to build socialism, people like Lenin and Trotsky, explicitly said, this is what we're trying to build, this is not what we have succeeded in building. But in terms of a case study for a country, with those caveats, and I will hope that you take those into consideration, I would like to talk about Cuba. Because Cuba is a tiny island with an even smaller economy, basically a tourist and tin economy, and production of sugar at one point, just off the coast of the greatest superpower, economic and military, that has ever existed in world history. Not the best place to really start building socialism, to be honest. They had a revolution in terms of like Castro and his movement. The purpose of their revolution was for democratic independence. It was a nationalist revolution to kick out foreign intervention politically, to kick out a dictator, incidentally, Batista, who, once he'd gone, he didn't take all of the foreign American, Canadian intervention with him. And so inevitably, in order to basically defend the revolution itself, they started nationalising and planning the economy, which I think was a step forward. It's not the end point. It's not, you haven't reached socialism simply by nationalising the economy. And what flowed from that is, first of all, the increase in literacy for the entire Cuban population, which was at a very low level even for the region at that time, so basically 100%. The creation of the best healthcare system in the region, one in which rich Americans will even travel to Cuba to have their operations, which frankly is miraculous as far as I'm concerned. Free education, up to and including university education, which is better than here, which is quite embarrassing considering how rich the United Kingdom is. And a political regime which definitely has its problems. And actually, I would say the whole of Cuban society has its problems that needs to be solved. And I would not consider Cuba to be a workers' democracy. But I think we could probably all agree that it was a lot healthier than other regimes that attempted to go in the same direction, such as North Korea. And so I would say that is a good example of what can be achieved on a very limited basis. So just think about what we could achieve on a global basis.
Okay, well, we have reading week coming up, so you can choose between Cuba or New Zealand, depending on where you want to go.
Really?
Do you want?
I mean, nobody has swum out into the ocean in New Zealand to find freedom, but they certainly have from Cuba. All you have to do is look at population flows, and you can tell which is a good country and which is a bad one.